everyone. You are listening to Core40, and we are on week
16.
Thank you. 16. It doesn't say on my sheet. It always does.
It's a big week because
big.
This is the world premiere in Core40 of my legs, because it has gotten to be it's gotten to be warm enough that we're both in sandals. I'm in shorts.
Yeah.
We're heading towards summer here and making a transition in the Core40 to the life of Jesus.
Yeah, we are. And this is a good one. I said this to you right before we started. John is like one of my favorite books. I don't know if that's a normal favorite or not, but I love the book of John. So
it's beautiful.
So go ahead and share with everyone what we've got.
Yeah, so Nikki, you posed a question to me before we went live here about the differences in some of the Gospels. And we're going to be looking at, over the next few weeks, Jesus in each one of the four Gospels. So what makes them different from each other? And in particular, what makes John different from the other three? That's a really good question. We can take a couple minutes just to orient you on the Gospels today. Now, the Gospels, all four of them are windows into the life and ministry, the teachings, the miracles, the encounters, the conversation, and the life and death of Jesus. And four different writers prepared reports and stories on the life of Jesus that became our Gospels. There's Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. And they were all written from about 70 to 80 AD. So we're talking about maybe 30 to 40 to 50 years after Jesus died and was raised from the dead. Mark is the shortest, and Mark is the one that focuses on the actions of Jesus. It's just a speeding freight train from Mark, from one of Jesus' events to the next. And he's focusing on the power of Jesus and the action of Jesus. Jesus is like a superhero in some sense to Mark. And Mark's the shortest and probably was the first to be written. Matthew is probably the longest, and in terms of the number of chapters at least, Matthew focuses on the teachings of Jesus. Matthew looks back at Moses in the Old Testament, who gave the Ten Commandments and these other laws and these principles that shaped Israel. And Matthew sees in Jesus the new teacher, the perfect teacher, the last teacher. So if you look at one of those Bibles with red letters, you'll see probably more red ink in the book of Matthew than any of the other three. Luke, if you remember, or this might be a new fact for you, was probably a doctor. He was a physician. You're someone who got your start kind of in the medical field. And he, like you, Nikki, I know, recognized the value of compassion when you're in ministry and you're helping people. And you know that very, very well. So Luke focuses on Jesus' encounters with hurting people and poor people and women and folks who are kind of outside the mainstream. They would be people who would be riding the back of the bus or kind of the outer rings of society. And Jesus doesn't focus just on the movers and shakers. He goes to these people who are underprivileged and weak and lost, and he spends a special time with them and focuses on them. And so Luke presents Jesus as this compassionate healer and friend to the lost people. So that brings us to John, where we're going to start today. And John is probably the most developed in terms of his theology. In other words, John doesn't talk as much about what Jesus does, although he talks plenty about that, but he talks even more about what it means that Jesus does what he does. So in the book of John, we have something called the I am statements, where Jesus says things like, I am the bread of life, and I am the living water, and I am the true gate. Jesus represents himself with these powerful images that help people understand how God is coming to them in this form of a man. And that's where we started with John 1 for section 16 here, lesson 16 of the Core40. And that is the coming of Jesus into the world. And John says that Jesus, who is this eternal word, and who's always with God, part of the Trinity, although John didn't know that language, forever God comes and dwells with people. And he uses this fascinating word. He actually says that Jesus tabernacles with his people. In other words, he pitches his tent, and the tent is almost like skin and bones. He makes his living in bodies like yours and mine. And when John says that Jesus makes his dwelling among us, he's saying something that is extraordinarily distinct among other religions of the world. John says, and the Christian faith says, that God became a person like you and me. There's a lot of religions that say that really the key to salvation is escaping our bodies and just being pure minds. But God says the key to salvation is that God becomes a man, and that this Word becomes flesh and makes his dwelling among us. And that is one of the linchpins by which salvation happens, is Jesus coming to earth to become like us so that he could take on our sin and our debt.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I love this. I love who John is, and I like the why behind things.
Yeah.
It helps me understand and learn things better when I know why. Why do you suppose even that there is the 4 different takes on Jesus in the Gospels in 4 different ways? I mean, should there be something that we embrace about John's?
Yeah, well, why are the different takes? That's a really good question. And the answer is partly because these stories, these biographies, and a gospel is different from a biography because it's not just a biography for information, it's a biography for transformation. It's not just, I want to tell you about my friend, it's I want to tell you about God becoming man to save the world. But they're produced by different groups of early Christians and probably in different places, and that means to different audiences. So Matthew, when he's writing, he's probably writing to Jewish people. That's why he makes Jesus out to be the fulfillment of Moses, or the second Moses. Mark is probably writing to Roman Christians. And so he is writing to people who live in the Greco-Roman world, the world of Jupiter, Zeus, Hermes, all those gods. And so Jesus is better than all of those gods. And so John is actually writing in the context probably of a deep struggle between Christians and Jews. And this is a sad and unfortunate part of Christian history, but tensions were high between Christians and Jews in the first century there. And for the first time, Jewish Christians who used to be able to worship in the synagogues with their friends, they're coming into conflict with those people. So John is very honest, and why we need to embrace John in our day and age has a lot to do with one of the last phrases that we studied in this lesson, and that is that not everybody accepts Jesus. We would love it if everybody came to the same conclusions that we did about Jesus. But in this very first part of his book, John says, not everyone received him. He says that Jesus came to his own. It's like he came to his own children. He came to his own people, like his own community, his own hometown, his kind of people, and they didn't accept him. And you know that's one of the heartbreaking things maybe for people who are watching this is if you have a child who you want to accept Jesus and has not accepted Jesus, or you've been witnessing to your neighbor for a long time and it just doesn't seem to be working, or you've invited your coworker to look at Jesus with you and they're resistant. So John wants us to understand, and maybe it's one of the reasons we need to reclaim John's message, because it's hard. Mm-hmm. It's hard. And he says there's a lot of darkness out there in the world. And we know that Jesus overcomes it with the light. But there's darkness, and we need to face that head on.
Yeah, so I can cut this out if I need to. We did this on the last one and got a lot of interest in our videos, so I'm going to do it. So I like the reference of it being different. It's going to reach different people and all that. And that is the message, like to just not lose anyone, that everyone gets there. That's the goal of all of them.
Absolutely.
And so, as we're trying to reach, try to be disciples of men, how do we do that when those people aren't there yet? We just keep trying in maybe these different approaches with compassion, with education, with whatever. But something, now this is the real question. So I like to read now, a lot about faith and different ways people can learn and grow. And it cracks me up when I read things that are new breakthroughs in science. And it's something that has been written in the Bible for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So obviously the Bible's this big. It can't have every single book of all the world in there. For example, right now I'm doing neuroplasticity. And I just think it's awesome, right? that they knew this.
I play with rubber bands.
Yeah.
Nick does
Yeah.
neuroplasticity.
We knew this for years, that we need to think positive.
Mhm.
We need to, whatever, Philippians 4:8.
Mhm.
Okay, it's been written in there, right? And psychologists thought this. But now that there's these books out that say, oh, we have x-rays now to prove that it works.
Mhm.
So I just think with time, these gospels came from different places, different times, but they all say the same thing.
Right. And one of the keys to understanding the Gospels is just to know what that word means. And this is kind of bonus content.
Okay.
But the word gospel originally didn't mean, and therefore I don't think it currently should mean, a list of what you need to do.
Right.
The gospel, or the euangelion, which really just means good news in Greek, is a term that was used to describe the message that was brought back from the battle by one of the messengers. So if, let's say, our town was off to war with another town, Nikki, and the battle was 10 miles away, and we're back at our homes and we're wondering what's happening, the gospel is the message that comes from the rider on horseback, coming from the front to say, we won, we won, we won. We overcame. Let me tell you how it happened. These archers got these guys, and then we created this moat, and then there was a charge at the end, and we won. And the gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are all about Jesus won. But they do it in different ways. Different emphases, different focuses, different pace. But they all end in the same place with the same final story, and that is that Jesus wins. So for us today, the idea of gospel should not be, let me tell you what to do to fix your life.
Right.
Or let me provide for you a set of principles that can really shape it. It's over and over again in different ways, different tones, maybe with different emphasis. Jesus won the battle. Jesus won for you. We're saved. We are saved. The town is safe. And for us, the world is safe, and our hearts are safe because Jesus won. So that's partly why we have 4 of them, because in these different places, different kinds of listeners, different kinds of cultures, and even economic and social and racial classes, they all needed to hear the same story. Jesus won. And that's what good news is. It's victory, finality, and Jesus is the liberator and deliverer.
That's where we need to end.
All right, I feel it.
Amen. All right, so we will see you next time on Core 40.